this weekend, November 7th through November 9th, Mercury retrograde begins. On Sunday the 9th, actually. Normally, I like to emphasize how common Mercury retrogrades are and that they're not really a big deal astrologically. But this Mercury retrograde this month through Sagittarius and Scorpio is definitely a little different. It's quite special, actually. Mercury will be in aspect to Uranus, which is just entering Taurus retrograde now on Friday, November 7th, actually. This weekend is really something. And Mercury retrograde will conjunct Mars in just a few days, next week. So altogether, this Mercury retrograde cycle is definitely extra dynamic, and it starts this weekend. So let's get this on the chart and start talking about it all. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just circle Mercury retrograde. My hope is that if you are enjoying studying astrology a bit, that the marks that I make on the chart are helpful to you. And if you just want to follow along and enjoy listening to the astrology, that these videos work for you too. So here we have Mercury retrograde. It actually hasn't turned retrograde quite yet on this chart. And I know that because the numbers that are behind it are black. So when a planet is retrograde, on a lot of charts, they depict, they show that by turning these numbers red. Sometimes you'll also see a little symbol for retrograde, but with this program, it turns the numbers red when the planet is retrograde. So you can see that Uranus is retrograde now, Neptune, Saturn, and Mercury will join that retrograde party soon. Like I said, I don't feel that Mercury retrograde is anything to worry about. But this one is a little extraordinary, so it's interesting and it's good to talk about. I wanted to mention as well to please leave any questions that you have in the chat, and I will do a little Q&A at the end. I'll read through the chat and answer any questions that you have. And if you're watching this later, feel free to leave questions or comments in the comments, and I'll read them and reply to you then too. I usually stay tuned in to these videos for at least 24 hours to try to reply to as many people as I can with questions or comments or feedback. So, okay, let's talk about this Mercury retrograde cycle. I feel like I wanted to say something else before moving on there. No? Okay, all right, let's get into the dates a little bit. I do want to just use an arrow real quick to sort of show just very simply what Mercury is doing during this retrograde. So like I said, it actually, you know what, I'm going to make this a little smaller so there's more room for my arrow. It actually hasn't started just yet. This will begin at the end of the weekend, so we're building to it. And we are going to talk about other things that are going on this weekend as well. But I definitely want this Mercury retrograde to be the big feature and to sort of talk through the cycle in general. Okay, so Mercury is turning retrograde now, moving this way through the chart is the retrograde motion backwards through the signs, right? From Sagittarius, it will retrograde into Scorpio before turning around and moving direct again, and then moving on and out of the house and sign. I don't like the way that came out at all. Let's just try one more time. So Mercury goes retrograde through Sagittarius into Scorpio, where it turns direct before moving out and away again. Okay, that's a little bit better. So you can see the two parts of the chart that this Mercury retrograde is working with. Mercury will be retrograde in Sagittarius from November 9th through 18th. And then in Scorpio, Mercury retrograde will enter Scorpio on November 18th and will be retrograde there until the 29th. And then Mercury will go direct through both of these signs until January 1st. So this is really a November, December story. We're retrograde through November and then we're direct through December. So it won't be until January that we have Mercury working with a different sign. Mercury will enter Capricorn on January 1st and will finally sort of not be in either Sagittarius and Scorpio. Usually Mercury moves through a house and sign in just a few weeks. So this is an extended stay because of the retrograde. And it's interesting to have these two signs coming together. There's something we're meant to sort of hone in on in these parts of the chart. All right, let me give a few more dates before we jump fully into that. Okay. So Mercury will conjunct Mars next week. Mercury retrograde will conjunct Mars next week on the 12th. I will talk about that next week in that report, but I will mention it a little bit today because I think it's important. Okay, Mercury retrograde will oppose Uranus on the 19th. This is the second time. The first was just last week on October 29th. So it's interesting because Uranus is changing signs as Mercury is changing signs. So we had the conjunction before with Uranus and Gemini, and now Uranus is here back in Taurus and will make this opposition as Mercury goes retrograde, and then one more time when it's direct. The Sun will conjunct Mercury retrograde, which is the midpoint, on November 20th. Mercury will trine Saturn and Jupiter, working with that water trine for the second time on the 21st. And then Mercury will conjunct Venus on November 24th. Mercury will trine Saturn and Jupiter again, making a beautiful water trine complete for the third time when Mercury is direct around November 7th. And Mercury will oppose Uranus again, moving direct on December 10th. So I didn't even say all of the dates there. And we will be continuing to talk about these movements as we go through them, but I did just want to give a big overview. And like I said, I didn't even give a big overview of everything. I didn't talk about the times when these planets are in sextile to Pluto, for example, when Mercury is sextile Pluto. But you get the idea. You see how complex this Mercury retrograde is. And those are the big notes, the Uranus opposition and the Mars conjunction. So I think there's a few different things to talk about here today. I think I see this time in three big parts. I see the Mercury retrograde in Sag, Mercury retrograde in Scorpio, and then Mercury direct through both. Arguably, you could break that up, but I think that the idea is somehow they might be connected. And there's an interesting way in which that Scorpio direct Mercury energy kind of feeds so beautifully into Mercury direct in Sagittarius that I'm sort of seeing that as one story. So there's those three time periods. Then there's also the Uranus oppositions, and there's also the Mars conjunction. So we will keep digging into this more and more as we go through the cycle. Today is just a great day for an overview because it's all getting started. Okay. So a story is playing out between these parts of your chart for the next couple of months. When we think about a Mercury retrograde, we think about these words. We're supposed to review or revise or revisit or relax something in those parts of the chart. There's a lot of energy, intellectual energy, turning inward related to those parts of the chart. So I do speak about this Mercury retrograde in the horoscopes for November, which are on my channel, best viewed by rising sign. I'm saying some different things today, so it's great to continue to watch this video. But also, you might want to check out the horoscopes on my channel by rising sign, best viewed by rising sign, to see where those parts of the chart are for you. And then I will also address it in the December horoscopes when we talk about the direct motion. I'm working on those now. All right, so let's just talk a little bit about Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius. Again, Mercury will be retrograde in Sagittarius until November 18th. So for the next little chunk of time here, next week and a half or so. You know, as with all Mercury retrogrades, there can be misunderstandings and miscommunications. And with Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius in a fire sign, especially given all of these aspects, I think those misunderstandings can show up in a couple of different ways, often sort of related to a problem with words. You know, people, there can be a lot of words flying around, interruptions. You know, Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, especially retrograde, is prone to interruptions and discussions. And that can complicate conversation. It can cause frustration. And I do think that being aware of this tendency in yourself and in others can be really helpful. One thing that I really love about Sagittarius energy is the optimism. Sometimes with Mercury retrograde, the optimism can go a little bit too far. And it can be optimism that isn't really warranted, you know, just kind of seeing the world with rose-colored glasses, which there's a lot to be said for being positive. I definitely am a fan. But you don't want to overlook problems through being that way. So part of the way that this Mercury retrograde through Sagittarius might be directing our energy is just through working with something, being very busy mentally. But sometimes what can go wrong along the way with that is sort of overdoing it with the words and exaggerating, needing to sort of go back later and take it back in some way. You know, it's always funny to me that Mercury is debilitated in Sagittarius because in a way, you know, sometimes it really, really makes sense that a planet is a little unhappy in a sign. And sometimes I have to think about it a bit more. And Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius is one that I had to think about a bit more because Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. It's so expansive. It wants the truth. And you would think Mercury would love that in a way. So curious, so interested in information. But I think it's overwhelming. And I think it's not as grounded as Mercury wants to be. I think it's too much. And I think that sometimes that's not a bad word for when Jupiter, Sagittarius, energy goes wrong. When we're more on the shadow side potential of the signature is that it feels like too much. It's like it's too loud. It's too many words. So there's a lot of that kind of energy kind of going to the Sagittarius part of your chart during those times. One thing that's extra interesting about that is that Mars is there as well, and I think that that ups the fire. We'll talk about that in a second. First, let's jump to just speaking really quickly about Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. And that will be occurring, just double checking my dates, from November 18th through 29th. And then Mercury will be direct through Scorpio in December, in the first part of December. So it's so different than Sagittarius energy. The way that is sort of that busy mental process, that Mercury retrograde busyness directed fiery and inward is challenging to Mercury. Mercury retrograde in Scorpio is so different. It is quiet and listening. It is focused, it is deep, it is intense. It is sort of the opposite of talking too much. It isn't talking too little, but it might be listening too much. Mercury in Scorpio is very focused and intense, maybe to a fault, listening and asking questions, not shying away from anything that's intense. Words still carry a lot of weight here. And it's like when Mercury is in Scorpio, these ideas, this mental process, these conversations, these words, they can reveal a lot because we're very perceptive with Scorpio energy. And this is a dynamic Scorpio season, period. So things can sort of come out and up through deep listening, through focus, through asking questions. We can learn information through perceptiveness, also through raw honesty and vulnerability, which is part of Scorpio signature. So it kind of lands the Mercury retrograde energy in the emotions and in the body a little bit for it to move through Scorpio. And then in December, when Mercury retrograde is pulling up and out and through these signs, it's a really beautiful process. You know, it's like we've had those discoveries of what Mercury learned in Scorpio, and then it moves into this sort of clarity of the Sagittarius season. You know, we dug deep. We uncovered something hidden. We confronted the new information here in November. And then by December, we're able to sort of move forward with greater clarity, having some sort of answers, maybe ready to talk in a different way by the time Mercury returns to Sagittarius. That energetic verbal energy comes back, but now we have a sort of clearer sense of what's going on and how we feel about it in these two parts of the chart. You know, whenever we heal something, it unlocks new possibilities. And there's something so healing about the potential of this Mercury retrograde and just this Scorpio season in general. And it's always good to remember that it's so worth the effort of doing any healing work because it tends to pay off in spades at the end of the day. You know, it improves our experience in the world, our relationship, our lives. And I also think it's interesting to think about where this is in your chart and to think about it as a little bit of a bridge. Where is this showing up for you? How are the themes of those two houses potentially connected in your life? You know, this is an Aries rising chart. So we're talking about ideas and beliefs and philosophy in the Sagittarius part, and travel and learning new things. And we're talking about transformation and wisdom and resources that come to us from other people. Heavier, more inward topics with the 8th house part of the chart. So for example, for an Aries rising, this is a very internal process. It's like lots of new ideas are coming in and being reshaped, and then going through this deep transformative, it changes it has the potential to signify that the person is really transforming as a result in some very deep inner way. And then the beliefs sort of shift again. You know, it's interesting. I almost want to connect it with like a worthiness theme a little bit in some way, understanding something about, you know, often we're sort of stepping into greater potential. But there might be some way in which you're sort of recognizing how much you've already changed, and that allows you to have a more expansive view of the future. but we're all our own best astrologers. We really, really are. We all know ourselves and our lives better than any astrologer does. So learning about these different archetypes and these different significations, and then sort of pondering it for yourself and thinking about how it plays out and shows up for you is the best way to learn astrology. So finding out where these two parts of your chart are and thinking about how that story might be connected, how those houses might be connected for you. Could be interesting at this time. I think by the time this Mercury retrograde is over, we have sort of a new narrative that we're working with. We have a new story now about where we're going, about why. I think it feels a lot more clear and a lot more certain. So know if there's some confusion in these parts of the chart, that's right on time. We have to kind of get a little confused before we can get clear, right? You have to recognize where things are confusing in order to sort of clear them up. I also must mention, especially with it being November, that you can have sort of delays, travel problems, things not going exactly according to plan during a Mercury retrograde. So that's worth noting as well. Usually it all works out in the end, but sometimes things don't go exactly according to plan. So it might take a little longer to get where you're trying to go, or you might make a change to your plans at some point in November. And I always think it's helpful to know that there's something so adventurous about Sagittarius spirit, and we do have Mars in Sagittarius and a lot of energy in Sagittarius during this time, and increasingly so as we go through the month. So always good to sort of embrace the adventure a little bit if possible. If something sort of starts to go wrong, we're going to have, the holidays somewhere different than we were originally planning to, sort of seeing that as an adventure, trying to find ways to make it fun, or, just maybe it's going to take you an extra day to get there. Same thing. Sagittarius has a very adventurous spirit, and I think leaning into that can be helpful when we have those travel tangles. Like I said, likely you'll end up where you're trying to be, but it just might not happen exactly with the timing that you originally had planned. But Sag is down for an adventure, so I think that's helpful. Okay, so those are the big three timings, but it is also really important to talk about these aspects as well. Mars and Mercury and Mars and Uranus. Okay, excuse me as I fumble around here with my paper notes. All right, so Mars and Mercury next week, we will have a conjunction. So Mercury and Mars were already conjunct once, and now it's going to happen again as Mercury moves retrograde through Sagittarius. It will pass by Mars. And I like a Mars-Mercury retrograde. There's a lot that I really like about it. For example, it can be very, very productive. It can be very determined. We can get a lot done with a Mars-Mercury retrograde. But I don't like the way that they're sort of running into each other rather than joining up. Because Mercury is retrograde, there is sort of a collision aspect to the conjunction that makes it potentially a little bit more suggesting that they're indicating, a challenge or some tension or some difficulty of some kind. I will talk about that a little bit more next week, but it's just interesting as that sort of talkativeness, potential to exaggerate, being overly optimistic, as that is all sort of going on with the beginning of this retrograde. We also have a little bit of this collision energy with Mars. Mars being here with Mercury sort of ups the fiery nature of everything. It adds a little more fuel, a little more passion to the words that are being spoken, potentially. And there are always multiple potentials to any of these signatures, right? Talking about something very passionately, being self-determined and productive, that is a wonderful use of that energy. It can also be sort of, it could go too far and it could become argumentative, aggressive, people sort of overly identifying with their ideas and being, taking things too personally, being too aggressive, being too, too tense about it. So just to say, there are sort of different ways to use this energy. And I think that with so much going on, so much of this fire energy in the sky, it's not a bad time to burn that off in some kind of way, through hard work, through exercise, through time in nature, through taking care of yourself. It's just a good time to sort of acknowledge, if there's a lot of excess energy, to try to burn that off in a productive way rather than unleash it in an unproductive way can be supportive and helpful. I think having the heads up about these timings with astrology it is sort of helpful. And it also makes it so that if we see this energy in others, it's not quite as surprising. So I think that's helpful too, keeping in mind that other people can, we all have this Mercury Mars conjunction at the same time. And so being aware, if someone's sort of coming in hot, that they need to probably burn off that energy somewhere. And if possible, it could not be on you. So trying to get a little space or, even just being aware of that can give you a little bit of sort of distance that can be helpful in dealing with these kinds of things, I think. But again, we can also just use the energy to be very productive. Okay. But we have to talk about the fact that when Mercury is retrograde through here, we'll also have an opposition with Uranus in Taurus. And it will be when Mercury goes retrograde back over into Scorpio, it will come into that opposition. We just came out of a Uranus opposition to Mars because Uranus just crossed over. It's just playing with this whole line here. And that is an unfolding, ongoing story that's happening alongside this Mercury retrograde. And so I think it's significant for that reason. Really, Uranus being back in Taurus, can we talk about that for a second? Because really, Uranus being back in Taurus is a much bigger story than this Mercury retrograde. And I think the fact that they're interacting, let's go a little bit smaller circle, but thicker circle. I think the fact that they're interacting just says something to me really about an emphasis on the Uranus retrograde through Taurus story. Uranus had been retrograde in Taurus since May of 2018. And Uranus and Taurus has been so interesting because wherever we have Taurus in the chart, we like things to be really stable. We are not a fan of change. Taurus is steady and grounded and a lot of things, but a fan of change is not really one of them. And Uranus, moving through this house and sign since 2018, has really been disrupting that. Now, for the last couple of months, Uranus has been in Gemini, and we had a little bit of a break from that. And we had an introduction to Uranus and Gemini energy, which is quick. It's like change multiplied by change, because the same way that Sagittarius and Scorpio are very, very different energies, Taurus and Gemini are very different energies. As much as Gemini As much as Taurus doesn't love change, Gemini does. Gemini will change something just for change's sake. Taurus energy won't change anything, even if it'll help. Sometimes we can be reluctant to make change in the Taurus part of our chart, even if it's change for the better, because that's how much we can be sort of a little bit stuck. So anyway, the last couple months, Uranus was in Gemini. And boy, the world really was moving and changing very, very quickly during that time. We were working with this outer planet triangle throughout the summer, and that was moving us into this new era quick, quick, quick. There's something of one thing that came up for me with that was technology. Hugely, just everything that moved and changed with AI, with the way it's being used by young people and how that's changing education. I thought of that because of Uranus and Gemini, dealing with education, learning, young people, even just so many different things. It was a crazy few months. And I think that all continues. But now Uranus is back in Taurus for a final few months. And I feel like we're sort of wrapping up all of the change in this part of the chart. Since 2018, we've been in this process of movement and change in the Taurus part of the chart. And we've actually become pretty good at being flexible here, I feel like, as well. As stubborn as we are, so much may have changed in this part of our life that now we're actually kind of good at allowing for change here. So it's interesting, might be interesting to think again. You can check your horoscopes, or if you already know, just think about that Taurus part of your chart and what changes have come in since 2018 here, how your stability has been disrupted. And now with the next, for the next couple months, thinking about what still needs change, what still needs to be shaken up a little bit and how you can do that. So sort of recognizing what's changed, thinking about what still needs to change, recognizing that you are so much more able to be flexible in these life areas. We're so much more capable of disruption just in general than we were, say, 10 years ago. More able to go with the flow, to not have everything planned and worked out. And that's connected to the nodes that we're working with at this time as well. Which are actually a part of this. It's really, really interesting with this square. But yeah, releasing needing to have everything figured out and needing to do everything perfectly and needing to understand exactly where we're going. Since 2018, there's definitely been a process unfolding in certain areas of our lives, but also just in general as a collective, that have made us a little bit easier to be flexible and to deal with different uncertainties, fluctuations, not having plans exactly the way we used to handle disruptions, to work with things that are unexpected or unplanned for, to navigate change. And that is part of life. So that is definitely a part of learning and a part of the path for so many of us, understandably. I also should mention that that oppositions here, when we're talking about the Uranus opposition, sometimes it can be people. Sometimes it can feel like two people sort of facing off against each other. Or it can be sort of two parts of yourself. But there often is sort of a facing off energy, a one side wanting one thing, the other wanting the other, and feeling like this other person or this other idea or this other pull is sort of standing in your way. Sometimes it can be helpful to try to figure out a way to do both, to appease both sides of that equation. I think that the fact that this Mercury retrograde is happening at the same time as Uranus and Taurus I think it's making more real, more personal, more tangible in our experience this Uranus and Taurus energy. It's kind of bringing it down into our own personal story. So there's kind of these two different stories playing out in November and December, but they sort of go together. And it might be a little bit of a return to the past. You might be working on some things that you worked on before. Maybe even having some conversations or some disagreements that you had before. But seeing things differently and doing things differently. And I think there is something here where we have so much greater clarity by the end of the process. And it's really the finishing touches of Uranus and Taurus. That's nothing to worry about either. Always this stuff is moving us forward, and it's not moving us forward. It signifies that we're moving forward. So, we're all connected. The astrology shows up this way, not as a cause of what's happening here, but it's mirroring it, if that makes sense. So we're all more connected than it seems like we are, and that includes to the Earth and the planets, and the movements of those planets can signify things about what's happening here. And astrology is just one tool that we can use to help us navigate this experience. Our mindfulness, our kindness to ourselves and to others. There are so many, our connections, there are so many tools that we need to use. So I feel like part of what I want to do here is just to sort of help not take astrology too seriously, which I know isn't easy, because I think the more you study it, the more you go, this is pretty accurate. And that's pretty exciting, and it can hook you in, and I get that. I've been through it. And at the same time, it is just a tool. It's not an answer. It's not a solution. It's not telling us what's going to happen. We make things happen. And it's really a tool for introspection about life, about ourselves, a tool for personal growth. So that, in my opinion, is the best way to use astrology. And good, we all need those reminders sometimes, because it is so exciting. Sometimes leaning real hard into the prediction happens. Okay, so I am going to dig into the chat now and get back to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to thank Rochelle and Rita, new members who have joined in the last month. I am doing just very occasionally, like every couple of weeks, a new brand of video or shorts that are for members only, that are really casual. I feel like my horoscopes are sort of the most formal, the most scripted elements of the channel. I work very hard on those horoscopes, and then these live chats are a little more casual. And then those member-only videos are a place for sort of even more casual chats, a little behind-the-scenes stuff, just talking about astrology, talking about this channel, different things like that. So you can see what the members-only videos are, and if you're interested, you can join, check them out. You can always cancel. And I just wanted to thank everyone for their support with that. Okay. I'm glad I'm digging into the chat now. And just thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. You don't have to subscribe. You don't have to leave any supers. Just you watching is so supportive of the channel. And I've really been putting more time into the channel lately and into the videos. And it's because of that support. So thank you. Thank you for watching and for being here. And for supers and membership, if you've gotten those. Extra thank you for that. It's very supportive. Okay. I'm so sorry. I love that the markings on the chart are helping you, Bebo. And I think that I hear that sometimes for people, and I'm glad that you feel that way. I kind of improvise a little bit and do my own thing, but I try to explain it as well as I can. Oh, I love someone talking about gemstones. I love crystals myself and gemstones. There are some people who really, really know about all the correlations with gems and with herbs and with all kinds of things with the astrology, with tarot, with so many different things. I currently do not use those in my practice, but I, with gemstones, tend to go to what feels good, right? So if something feels good and feels right, I listen to that. And sometimes if something feels a little funny with the gemstone, you might kind of need it too. It can be hard to tell, but that's the only insight I have from that. Okay, someone is asking about charts. Yeah, I mean, there are so many different ways to get your chart. I remember when it was so hard. 20, 30 years ago, to get your chart was not easy. There's free ways online. I am not sponsored by anyone. I have no sponsorships, no brand deals yet. I'm open to it, but currently don't have any, so I'm not being paid to say any of this. But astro.com is an amazing resource, totally free. You go to the extended chart selection and you can pull up any chart. It takes time, it takes a little work, and there really are a bunch of programs, especially paid programs. What I use here for my charts is Astro Gold. It is a little bit more of a pricey app, but it's great. I really should be a sponsor for them. If you're listening, Astro Gold, I'm open to it. And apparently I talk about you anyway, so that would be great. And then the program that I use here for the markings is InShot, which is a video editing software, and I use it for the horoscopes. And I just started using it for these live reports as well because I'm an amateur and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm winging everything and making it all up as I go. So it ends up being this sort of amateur setup that actually is working really well for us. What I like about it is that the chart is illuminated. If it was just a piece of paper, it wouldn't be as easy to see. And same with these colors and everything. It allows me to mark the chart in such great ways to use these programs together. So, I have thought many times about changing it, and then I just keep sticking with this because I think it's working. Yes, talking about how some of the flights are being cut starting today. I know it really is. That's actually really interesting that they we're cutting flights by up to 10% over the next few days. That definitely goes with Mercury retrograde, and perhaps things will clear up as Mercury goes direct towards the end of the month. I hope it doesn't take that long, though. That's too long. That's way too long if it's 3 weeks. But yeah, I see people talking about airports. It's true. It's a tricky time for travel. Just some delays, things not going exactly as planned. Oh, I love everyone just saying hello. And I just appreciate you all being here so much. Yeah, if you're interested in what this means for you, check out your horoscopes on my channel. I see someone asking what this means for them if they're a Capricorn. Check out horoscopes on my channel, best viewed by your rising sign. Yes, Sagittarius, Scorpio here, retrogrades mess me up sometimes. Yeah, I mean, we all respond differently to these things. Mercury retrogrades, like I said, are really common. We have several per year. I always think of it as it's not the kind of thing that you'll remember 5 years from now. However, this particular Mercury retrograde cycle is just extra dynamic, so that might not be true this time. There's a lot happening with it. There really is. I love people talking about loving learning astrology. That is the right That's the right attitude to have about it. And that's part of why we don't want to go too crazy with it too, because we want to keep it fun and we want to enjoy it. It's sort of like why you don't want to like force yourself to meditate or to see a friend. This is supposed to be a positive activity. It doesn't need to be something on my to-do list that I'm dreading and that I have to get through. And it should be, that's why we want to keep the joy with astrology always and not move into the fear or like taking it a little bit too seriously, because it just supports your learning and it supports you having a good experience, to just enjoy it and have fun with it and be like, oh, I love learning astrology. It's so interesting. And I'm also doing this and this and this and this. And just if you start to sort of feel yourself going a little bit in it too much, to just take a break for a few days or a few weeks even. It's good to come in and out a little bit of astrology. I love seeing everyone here. And yeah, I like someone asking about the Taurus moon, the Taurus full moon that we just came out of. So interesting to have that beautiful Taurus full moon just a couple of days ago, right at the time of the Mars Uranus opposition. Before Uranus moved into Taurus, when Uranus was in Gemini. I felt like, for me last week, I almost felt like I could feel that. I did feel kind of very relaxed on one level and like a bundle of nerves on another, kind of. And parts of life felt calm and steady, and other things felt really hectic, also just very busy. And it kind of felt that way in the world too. News that felt promising and then news that felt scary, just a dynamic week. But I think that the hopefulness and the grounding of the moon in Taurus was really helpful last week. And that will continue to be the case for the next 2 weeks. We're still under the lunation of that Taurus full moon. So it's still a great time, guys, I love this question. It's a good reminder for me. I'm acting like I'm reminding you, but I think you're reminding me. It is a good reminder that we're under the lunation of the Taurus full moon. So it's a great time to enjoy being in the body, going for a walk in nature, cooking food, anything sort of being in a body, wearing comfy clothes, getting a massage, basically anything physical, anything with the earth, gardening, like having your hands actually in the dirt in some way. I don't know. I don't think we can really garden in November. I do need to clean out some window boxes. Perhaps, something like that. Your hands are still in the dirt, even if they're pulling out flowers that have seen better days, to make it ready for next year. But all of that can be really soothing and really grounding during the Taurus full moon time. And that might really help in the next couple weeks to soothe our energy. They say that, food can taste a little bit better during a Taurus moon lunation. Things can look a little bit more beautiful. It sort of actually turns up our senses a little bit. And so it's a great time to be present and enjoy kind of being in a body a little bit. So that's a great reminder. Thank you. Yeah, I love everyone talking, and I just love the way that you're speaking with each other in the chat as well. I love the way that this community is supporting each other. Where if someone is like showing up in distress in some way, you're all quite encouraging, and I just love the way you share your primary triad and share your experiences. Your birthdays even, and then people who have the same birthdays are connecting. It's really cool. Yeah, so much changing in the job market, right? And people talking about how the job market is changing with AI. It makes it hard to know what to sort of go for in terms of career, even because so many industries are changing. And it makes me think about our ability to be flexible and how we've gotten more flexible in recent years, and we've gotten more adept at not knowing exactly what's coming and what's next. And I think that's helpful. Wendy is sharing Cap Sun, Leo rising, Libra moon. Been being flexible for a while. Yeah, I hear you. It's part of life, right? I mean, it's always important. It's always really, really helpful. I guess thinking that we know what's going to happen was never really real anyway. It was always up in the air, but sometimes we had sort of that illusion of control, but it was actually just an illusion anyway. Um, oh, I love people recommending gemstone books and people recommending charts, different sites that you can use for your charts. Yes. Yes. Oh, interesting to talk about how taking care of children and elders sometimes they can be sort of influenced by these energies. I think that's true. We can see it manifest in some people more than others, and that makes sense. That kids and elders who need a bit of care, that sometimes you can see the these things come up in your interactions with them. Sharing of birthdays from Roberta and Karen. Yeah, I think we're all looking for people we can connect with in this crazy world, for sure. And I'm grateful that we have this community and that we have astrology and that we have other tools as well that we can use to help us connect with ourselves and with others and with our best intentions, our highest selves, I want to say. I always hate to sort of sound trite, but to sort of help us try to continue to be our best selves, I guess. Any tools that can help us do that for ourselves and for others. I'm very grateful that you have been watching and that all of you are here. And this has been a really long episode, so I'm going to sign off now. Thank you so much. I will be back on Monday. Have a great weekend.